Hello and welcome to another Smaulgld live stream. Today is Thursday, August 16th, 2018. And today's topic is alternative media and gold pumper logical fallacies. Over time, I have gone through and taken apart some of the stories, but today I'm going to give you the fundamental logical basis so that you can also take a look at stories and see if you're looking at a fallacy or just a made-up story, but be able to take a look at the story with a critical eye using logic to see if there's anything behind the story. But before we do that, let's just take a look at what's behind what happened today in the markets. Gold and silver did have slight rebound. Silver had a bit more of a rebound than gold did. Gold opened at 1171, climbed up to 1181, and then fell back down to about where it is now at 1173. The silver story was a little better. Silver opened at about 1444, got all the way up to about 1480, and is currently trading around 1463. Still well below where one might think they should be at this point. Okay, let's take a look at the cryptocurrencies, and then we're going to get into our logical fallacies. So cryptocurrencies went up earlier in the day. They came back down. They're up a little bit over the last 24 hours. Bitcoin is in the $6,300 range, maybe $6,340. Ethereum at about 288. It had been higher than that at one point. Bitcoin Cash holding above 500 at 517, and Litecoin at 555.29. All right, now we're going to take a look at alternative media and gold pumper logical fallacies. Now, first of all, before you even get into logic, you have to make sure you're even dealing with facts. And sometimes when you are dealing with a gold pumper story or a silver pumper story or an alternative media story that something's going to happen, sometimes they're not even factual. You hear China's going to do this, or for example, the gold back yuan story. There was never ever any source for that story. An article appeared in the Nikkei Asian Review, but there was no source for the underlying fact that China was going to launch a gold-backed yuan. And we're going to go through what happens when facts change or facts are turned out to be not facts, but the narrative needs to be preserved. What you have, and this is just to start with, is rationalization versus reasoning. Now, it's nuanced, but keep that in mind. Rationalizing looks like logic, but it starts with a conclusion. For example, gold's going to go higher. That's always the conclusion. And then tries to figure out what you can say to support that. Reasoning is the basis, is the process, not the basis, the process of examining evidence and then reasoning towards a conclusion. You don't have a conclusion in advance. You just see evidence and you're trying to figure out what that evidence means, if anything. Rationalization already has a conclusion, and so it's going to find evidence, or it's going to look at information and make it fit a conclusion. And that's why you have to be wary when you know that certain people will always lead to a conclusion, so they're going to rationalize rather than reason. So you start with a conclusion, gold set to skyrocket, whatever it is. What I found out, and I bought into all this stuff years ago, when I saw that the prices weren't skyrocketing, I tried to step back and say, well, why aren't they? And you have to look at things without a conclusion in advance. And then it becomes, all of a sudden, you become logical. You just see facts as what they are, and then you try to put them together and see where they might lead you. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal gold. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal silver to skyrocket. But once you start to think that way, you only look towards reaching your conclusion and rationalizing towards it rather than looking at things reasonably or logically. Now, what the narrative, the narrative spinners and the conspiracy theorists do is they manage to get you into that web, and this is why you follow it. You follow them. They give you an appearance of control. You feel better after you get this rationalization or this explanation why gold and silver are set to skyrocket, even though they're just going straight down. But they'll rationalize it to you. They'll give you another fact. They'll tell you something. We're going to go through what the logical fallacies are that they employ either knowingly or unknowingly. They could employ them knowingly, which would be sinister, or they can employ them unknowingly just because they don't think logically. But it's up to you to decide. It could be a combination of the two. So you feel better, and a lot of what social media is about is how you feel, not about how you think, not about how you reason. And if someone can make you feel better, that you're not holding something that's a loser, either a political position or investment position, a gold position, whatever it is, if they can rationalize and explain to you, then you feel indebted to them. And they feel in control, you feel in control. They've now rationalized why reality doesn't exist, but really they know. You know, you're now woke because you've been given this rationalization why you really haven't lost money, why you really are better off holding silver or holding gold or believing in Q, whatever it is. You're now woke. Everyone else is just sheeple. You have some special insight into the way the world works. And where'd you get it from? You got it from the narrative spinner. He or she has told you, everybody else doesn't get it, and when they finally do, you're all going to be, well, he at least, and you by definition going along with them, are going to be perceived as the geniuses who knew this all along. So all this rationalization makes it look like, even though you're getting your butt kicked, you're really not. You really understand what's going on. You're woke. Everyone else is sheeple, not realizing that in a sense you're sheeple because you're following a narrative that isn't logical, that may have logical fallacies. But you see, they'll tell you they've connected the dots in a way that no one else can, and now you too, despite all evidence in reality to the contrary, you also can see things in this very special way. And the longer you believe in logical fallacies, they become immune to refutation. You have to believe them. You must believe them. And you end up in a closed belief system. And if someone doesn't agree, and we're going to go through what happens when someone points out logical fallacies, I've been on the other end of this, so I know exactly what it is. They are cast aside as either a shill, a person lacking integrity, because you obviously are not in this closed system, which is immune to refutation, or even a traitor. I saw where somebody sold their silver and now they're a traitor. I saw where somebody decided they were going to go into cryptocurrency and they had lost all integrity. So once you get involved in logical fallacies, you can't believe in logic. You can't believe in anything else. And let's go through some of these. I think I put them up for you here. This is just, you can follow along here. I'll use this generally. I didn't really prepare this. These I just came up with. There's probably 50 logical fallacies, but these are the ones that just came to mind. So the first is cherry picking facts. This is classic. They all do it. And what it is they take a fact, they imbue it with significance. They may ignore other facts that undermine the fact that they're telling you. They'll dismiss evidence that may reject the conclusions, assuming even the fact is true. And this is also called the fallacy of incomplete evidence. So the person is going to argue that this specific piece of data that they may have a chart, they may have a sentence, they may have a fact, whatever it is, they're going to tell you that that fact is so important. And they're also going to look at it from the point of view of confirmation bias. Because a cherry-picked fact is looking for a fact to support the conclusion. It's not a function of reasoning. It's a function of making sure they have something to rationalize what point of view they're gonna tell you, and it's gonna fit the narrative that they're always touting. So for example, and you know when I do the robot voice, central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. That is a cherry-picked fact. Another one I heard the other day was, to all the naysayers who are bearish gold, I point out one fact. The professionals are using this opportunity to go long. That is all you need to know. Now, first of all, we talked about this the other day. That is not all you need to know. That is a fact. Well, the central banks are buying gold is a fact. That professionals are using this opportunity to go long, we don't know if that's a fact. So you can't even get past that. So let's stick with central banks are buying gold. That is all I need to know. That is a cherry-picked fact that is imbued with special significance that it doesn't really have. But they've convinced you the fact that central banks are buying gold is somehow rationalization for the fact that central banks know something, there's a reset coming, they are smart, and everyone else who's not buying gold is dumb because central banks who are supposedly smart are buying gold. Now, if you break that one apart, and we have done it, and it's useful to do it again here, is you have to ask yourself the question, what banks, why are they buying it, how much are they buying, what impact does their buying have on the gold market? And once you realize, if you go through those questions, it's insignificant that 3 central banks, Turkey, Kazakhstan, and Russia, have bought gold over the past couple of years. They've bought about 350 tons last year out of the 4,100 tons that were produced. And they're all gold producers, and they all have very horrible currencies. So knowing that, it's an insignificant fact. It may be a fact, but it's not all you need to know. It is not it's not a conclusion. It's just an assertion that it means something more than it does. It doesn't really mean anything if you actually analyze it. So that is an example. Number 1 on our list is just cherry-pick facts, and you don't need to know anything else. That's what they say. That is all you need to know. Because if you knew something else, you wouldn't give that fact any significance. It'd be nice to know. It may be part of a broader mosaic of things that you need to know if you're going to analyze the gold market. But central banks are buying gold. That is all you need to know. That's robotic idiocy. But you can see if you keep repeating it. And no one, and then what they do is they say, no one can refute that fact. Okay? I can't refute it. Russia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey, I report on it, have purchased about 350 tons of gold in the past year. So what? The second one, very, very common, and it ties in with the third one, is the Greeks were brilliant. So were the Romans. They already knew thousands of years ago. There's been no real advances in logic in thousands of years. They already knew that people can BS each other in any number of ways, and they had names for all of them. This one is called argumentum ad populum, and that's Latin argument to the people. This is the one where I'm making a point why something gold-backed yuan isn't correct, has no logical basis, isn't factually based, wouldn't make sense even if there were facts around it. And the response comes back, everyone says so. You're the only one who says otherwise, as if that answers or counters my objection to why this story is complete nonsense. So that's the one they use, everyone says so. Often in conjunction with that argument is called argumentum ad verecundium, which is some authority has said it. Now these two go in together because usually what happens, at least in the alternative media and in the gold and silver pumper communities, someone comes up with some story. there's going to be a COMEX default or whatever it is, whatever this, the gold back yuan game changer, some story that's going to set gold and silver skyrocketing, usually comes from somebody in the community that is perceived to be an authority or an expert. And so when you say, well, let's look at that, they'll say, well, Joe Smith, who happens to be the big silver expert or the big gold expert, he says so. And not only does he say so, but everyone says so. And you're the only one who says otherwise. So then it goes like this. If I have to trust either Joe Smith or you, I am going to trust Joe Smith. Which means they're not willing to think about any logical reason why what Joe Smith may say may not be true. And to further make them feel like they're correct in believing that, and everyone else says it is true too. Now, the reason everybody else says it's true is because all the channels say the same thing. Once Joe Smith comes out and says, the SDR is going to come out in January 2018 and it's game over for the dollar. SDRs are a thing. The IMF has SDRs. The SDR is the world reserve currency, and it will be the new world order. And that's it. They said it. The economists said it. Everyone says it. You can't criticize it. So generally, argumentum ad populum comes from argumentum ad verecundium, which is the popular number of people believe it because some authority says it. Now, that doesn't mean that the people can't be right, and it doesn't mean that the authority can't be right. What it means is just because a lot of people think it, or just because the authority says it, doesn't make it right. My example is if Einstein says 2 plus 2 is 7, and you try to show somebody when you add up 2 plus 2 it's 4, and their argument is, but Einstein says it's 7. I don't care that Einstein says it's 7. But Einstein has managed to convince 700 people around you that it's 7, merely because he's Einstein. And then they look at me and they say, well Einstein says it, you're the only one who says it's 4, because it is. Now, another one, argumentum ad hominem. People think that's just attacking the person. It's not. If I call you a jackass, that's not an argument. That doesn't undermine your argument. That just means you're a jackass. It's because of who you are why the argument fails, which is arguing as reason because of who you are that you're wrong. Just calling somebody a name is not an ad hominem logical fallacy. But basically, they're saying it's the opposite of the argumentum ad verecundium. It's the opposite of saying we believe it because this person's an expert. We're saying we don't believe you because you are either a shill, you're a disinformation agent, you happen to be of a certain persuasion, you're a moron. Just being a moron isn't enough. It has to be that you are somehow not to be believed, even though you're not making something up. You're just showing how an argument works. Doesn't matter. They're going to say, we can't believe you because you're a shill, you're a disinformation agent, you don't like gold, you don't like silver, you've never liked Joe, you've always hated Joe. That's irrelevant. If the argument stands on its own, it doesn't matter what your motive is. Now, it's important to look at those things, but they don't prove that the argument is false. So by saying you're a shill, the guy could be a shill. He could be a disinformation agent. That doesn't destroy the argument. And a similar one to that is poisoning the well. And this is a variation of the ad hominem. So let's say Hitler says it's noon, and it is noon. And I agree with him, and everyone points out Lewis agrees with Hitler. So they're poisoning the well. So the next thing I say is tainted by I agree with Hitler. Or let's give you a more common one. Let's say there's a guy who's notorious. He's always making predictions and they're always wrong. But let's say occasionally he says things that are factually correct. And I say something that's factually correct and somebody's trying to undermine my argument. He says, well, that's what that other guy always says. And the idea there is, oh, okay, You're going to be thrown in with a guy who is always making bad predictions. He makes so many bad predictions, everyone knows that he's a buffoon, and you're saying stuff that he said in the past. That's poisoning the well. That is not an argument against what you're saying. They're kind of somewhat of an ad hominem. It's almost like poisoning the well is attack on you because of not who you are, but who you associate with. Even though you don't necessarily even associate with that person, they want to draw the connection with you and that person. The next one is the U2. This is a tu quoque, I think how you say it in Latin. This is when you try to discredit an opponent's argument by pointing out the other person also does the same thing or makes the same offense. This is one where it happens a lot in politics and a lot of the alternative media. It's a childish argument. I always looked at it this way. You have two sons and one of them steals a cookie. And you say, Johnny, did you steal a cookie? And Johnny says, no, Joe took one too. That's not an argument. The idea that Joe also took a cookie doesn't mean that Johnny didn't take a cookie. His defense that Joe took one doesn't negate that he also took one, and that is a very bad argument. If you try to point out that Obama's economic policies are bad, you've all heard this one, but George Bush's weren't any better. That doesn't mean Obama's weren't. And you can never get to an argument on the merits because it's a way of deflecting. And I view it as childish, and it's not even an argument. And if a child can do it, it's not much of an argument. Now this one, the next one, argument ad ignorantum. I love this one. This is arguing from ignorance. You have a lack of evidence, but yet you use that lack of evidence as a positive argument to make a conclusion. Since you can't prove it's not true, well, it's got to be true or vice versa. So let's say there's someone out there who says that Goldman Sachs has been buying gold hand over fist, and he's buying all the gold eagles on the planet. And you ask, how do you know that? And the person says, well, no one else was buying the gold eagles. The official numbers say X number of gold eagles were bought, and seems to me that from calling around, only half that number was sold, and therefore someone had to buy the other half of the gold eagles, and that entity has to be Goldman Sachs. And you say, well, how do you know it's Goldman Sachs? Well, how do you know it isn't? That is argument ad ignorantum, because you're looking at the lack of evidence as a positive argument for your conclusion. So you don't know where the other half of the gold eagles are, and therefore maybe Goldman Sachs had a motive, so it had to be Goldman Sachs. Now, that is also usually backed by other logical fallacies. You disagree with that. Well, obviously, you must be a disinformation agent for Goldman Sachs, because you don't want it known that Goldman Sachs has bought all these gold eagles, or you're a shill. And you say there's never been any proof that Goldman Sachs did anything, and now they've put you in a position where you're defending Goldman Sachs. Well, obviously, you must be wrong, and the argument now stands. You can't prove it's false. You can't prove that Goldman Sachs didn't buy them, whereas the person proffering that proposition never proved that they did buy them. And the argument gets even better. You're a shill for Goldman Sachs. So you add in the ad hominem argument to an argument ad ignorantum. So a very good argument, logical fallacies, to get you to believe them usually employs more than one. So you can get the argument from the authority, and then it's the argument from the number of people who believe it, and then there's the argument where you out of ignorance, and then when somebody tries to deny all of that, well, here's what happens. You don't believe the authority? Why would I believe you? Everyone else believes it. Why would I believe you? You can't prove it's not true. Why do I want to believe you? And you must be a shill. You must be some type of disinformation agent. These are all logical fallacies, but go back to what we said at the beginning. It makes you feel good to know that you've got 4 logical fallacies on your side, and the guy trying to reason with you with logic has none. And he has fewer people on his side, so he can be tossed aside to the curb, and you can now go on believing whatever logical fallacy you wish to believe. There's others like intelligent design. It's almost the same thing as you can't explain it, and therefore that becomes an argument why your point of view is correct. It's the God of the gap strategy, they call it. So for example, I never forget this one. This one was the AC chain concept, which was based on logical fallacies and misinterpretation of facts. And because facts were missing, they were able to fill them in a way they wished it to be. And if you disagreed with that, well, then either you were a shill, or, but in the AC chain situation, there were a number of facts, and this was one which was combination of anomaly hunting and deflection. So anomaly hunting is you don't know something, and it seems out of place, such as U.S. citizens were not allowed to participate in the AC chain offering. Well, that meant if you already had whipped yourself into a frenzy that this was a New World Order plan to introduce a one world currency and it was going to exclude Americans, well, then it all fit to you because the anomaly was explained in the context of your own theory. But that's not why U.S. citizens weren't allowed to participate. In all these ICOs, they're all concerned about U.S. citizens being involved in ICOs because of U.S. securities laws. So that's why that any company issuing an ICO has any legal counsel will tell you don't have the U.S. citizens involved in it. The other parts of the AC chain that didn't make any sense were they had mentioned the word SDR. And that led people to believe that, well, then the IMF must be backing this scheme. And that ties into the one world currency because they've always wanted to bring the SDR forward as a world currency. And therefore, well, here we go. We've got a plan here. It's digital. And we all know how nefarious digital is. And this is emanating out of China. And we know that China is part of the IMF. And China is big. And they want to control the world. So they're going to digitize T. You see how this all goes? You can start to believe anything. But then I pointed out that SDRs can only be issued, not market SDRs, but the SDR can only be issued by the IMF. A private company cannot issue a IMF authorized SDR. And not only can a private company not issue a IMF authorized SDR, but an individual country can't do so either. They can issue a market SDR, which is the same as anyone can do that. You just, whatever the benchmark you want to be for payments, you just say, instead of paying me the average of dollars, pay me the average of the 5 currencies that are in the SDR. That is not an IMF SDR. That's just the methodology of figuring out what the value of the contract might be. But what happened with the SDRs was, if you pointed out that private companies couldn't issue these things on behalf of the IMF, and that not only couldn't private companies do it, but that individual countries couldn't because it required the United States and other countries to go along with it. Well, that's when they do what's called moving the goalposts. Well, hold on. No, well, you know, the IMF, they'll just do whatever they want. So when they presented with a fact that destroys the whole concept, now you're subject to back to ad hominem. Well, you must be a shill for the New World Order because we've uncovered this conspiracy and now you're trying to say it doesn't exist. But we're on to you, Mr. Shill, Mr. Disinformation Agent. And don't worry about this this minor detail about who can issue SDRs and the mechanisms for doing that. We have an answer to that. Well, some famous guy said that they were going to do it. And, you know, the IMF does a lot of stuff under the table. So now you have to believe Basically, they're going to say whatever they can say. They're going to move the goalpost to defend, and this is rationalization. You're starting with a conclusion that it's already been determined that the IMF is going to issue an SDR. It's going to be to digitize T. It's going to be a global currency, and it's going to exclude American citizens, and it's going to enslave humanity. And you're not going to get away from that. They're going to rationalize that one into the ground, and if you argue against it, they'll move the goalposts. They'll bring up other logical fallacies, including the ad hominem attack, and which might even include bringing up someone who's perceived as an authority. Well, this guy says the IMF is going to do this, even though the famous authority may never have ever explained how he gets around the SDR issue. All right, so now you have another one, logical fallacy called the false dichotomy. I love this one because anytime somebody tells me there's two choices, you know there isn't. There's generally more than two choices. People like to look at things in binary fashion, but when you frame something in either or, it's almost a gotcha moment. It's a logical fallacy. And you see it in the Bitcoin. You have pumpers and you have naysayers. The people that absolutely hate Bitcoin, they say it's going to zero. All cryptocurrencies are going to zero. All of them. There's not one bit of value in any cryptocurrency. They're all the same, and they're all going to zero. On the other side, there's people that say Bitcoin's going to destroy central banks and corporations, and it's going to the moon. Now, those aren't your two choices. But what happens is you feel better if you're with one or two of the other crowds. If one crowd says it's going to zero, then you can join in discussions about how you tell them, you stick to your integrity, you stand behind sound money and hard assets, and you be the guy that protects us against these crypto nuts. And then the crypto people, they'll take the view that this is the end of the world. This is going to change the world. This is everything. Everything is going to be in crypto. And they're not looking at a potential of countless other ways that this all could shake out. They cannot. Some of them can go to zero, but not all of them. Some of them may do well, some of them may not, but not to the anti-crypto crowd. And then also, Bitcoin may never destroy central banking or corporations, but that doesn't mean it goes to zero. It could be corralled, it could morph, something else can come along. As you can see, if you allow your mind to consider different possibilities, it's not hard to do. But when you're dealing with logical fallacies, people who have a vested interest in telling you cryptos are going to zero because they're pumping something else, or Bitcoin is going to the moon because it's going to destroy central banking, they're pumping Bitcoin. So the pumpers will always have an incentive. Now, just because someone has an incentive doesn't mean they're making logical fallacies. But in this case, I think they are. With the people that say Bitcoin is going to zero, they're leaving no other choice. And they're forcing you with a dichotomy in which you may think, well, if I had to flip a coin, is Bitcoin going to zero, or is it going to take over the world? Well, it's probably going to go to zero. But it's probably going to do something in between at a much higher probability than go to zero. It's also probably the same thing with the people who think it's going to go and destroy central banking and become the global currency. They might believe that more than it's going to zero, but if they thought about it, they probably believe something in the middle. So that's a logical fallacy when you present a false dichotomy, either or, A or B. Another one is they shift the burden of proof. They come up with their harebrained scheme or whatever. Goldman Sachs has 6 billion gold eagles in a vault somewhere. And you say, okay, how do you know that? And they say, well, because there were a lot of gold eagles sold, but there's a lot unaccounted for, so it must be Goldman Sachs. And you say, well, that doesn't follow. That's a fallacy. And they say, well, you can't prove that they don't have them. Of course I can't prove they don't have them. It's your theory. You have to prove it. So that's another one that they do, is they shift the burden of proof. They make you defend their or disprove their speculation. Let's just do one more. This one's called post hoc ergo propter hoc. This means after this, therefore, because of this. And this is akin to the correlation and causation. So B followed A. Let's see. Kennedy gets shot and Johnson becomes president. All right. So B followed A. And then they use it cui bono. Well, who benefited from Kennedy getting shot? Johnson. So B, Johnson, followed A, Kennedy getting shot, must mean Johnson had a hand in getting Kennedy shot. No, it doesn't mean that. It's an avenue to look at, but it doesn't follow that after this, therefore, because of this. It could be anyone could have shot Kennedy. And you can have countless theories on who shot Kennedy, from lone gunman to conspiracy to mafia to CIA, and maybe none of it would ever come anywhere near Johnson. But the natural consequence of Kennedy dying is Johnson became president. But it doesn't follow after this, therefore, because of this. But you hear that a lot. Something happens, and because the two follow, they view the correlation as causation. All right, then the straw man false analogy. I'll probably have to do a full-blown, maybe about 20 of these logical fallacies, but those are the ones that just came to mind today. It'd also probably be useful if I can do a slideshow. But let's see what we got in the way of comments. I haven't been checking the comments. Let's see. All right. All right. Sean Sailor, Mugs, that is all you need to know. Now, there are certain things that aren't logical, and they are faith-based. And that doesn't necessarily have to follow logic. But what they do is, the narrative spinners, what they like to do is to create fallacies that make you believe. That's why when they say someone's been kicked out of the group, you know, this person no longer believes the narrative. They are a traitor. They lack integrity. They are a shill. It almost takes on the characteristics of a religion or a cult, believing in a narrative that is based on a fallacy. ASMR people, hello, future wealthy people. Trace Young, would it be a logical fallacy to say that gold and silver are extremely undervalued? No. It would depend on the rationale for which you gave how you built your argument about gold and silver being undervalued. If you said central banks are buying gold, therefore gold is undervalued, that doesn't follow. That's not logic. That's just assigning. It's an assertion. An assertion is not logic, is not rationale. The way you would have to do way you would have to create some type of reasoning towards a valuation of gold and silver, you'd have to show your steps and your assumptions and why you believe it's undervalued. Just stating it's undervalued is an assertion. And stating it and throwing in a fact that really may or may not have anything to do with it on its own would be a logical fallacy, because central banks are buying gold, therefore gold is undervalued doesn't follow. ASMRP, silver pumpers are much funnier than gold pumpers. I haven't noticed the sense of humor in either, really. Sean Sailor, silver would be $400 an ounce if it wasn't for all this manipulation. Okay, you could make a logical argument for manipulation holding down the price. It may be subject to debate, but you can make a logical argument. You can't just state it. That's an assertion. You can show the value of, the amount of silver, the amount of trading, when trades happen, what happens to the price. You can actually make logical arguments, not fallacious arguments, as to why you believe that silver would be higher but for manipulation. Now, it's hard to prove things in an A-B context where you can't really prove an alternative world where there isn't manipulation, but you can make logical arguments. But you have to you have to get people to agree with your assumptions. But you can make a logical argument. It would not be fallacious to make an argument. You may be incorrect and you may not be able to prove it. That doesn't mean that your arguments are fallacious. Trace Young, would it be a logical fallacy to say that silver is available for very close to the cost of production? No. That would be either a statement of fact or not a statement of fact. Now remember at the beginning I was talking about a lot of people make statements of fact or they misstate facts. We heard a lot about people saying a month or two ago that gold miners were producing gold at costs higher than the price of gold. That was only partially true. That was only true in South African mines, certain mines. So they cherry-picked those that fact to make a statement which was misleading, because now either they did it on purpose or they didn't know. But I went and reviewed, and again, you also have to assume that the numbers that you get, this is moving the goalpost, that the numbers that you get from the companies are real. But the numbers that I looked up in the top 8 gold mining companies showed they were all producing gold at a price lower than the price of gold. All under 1020, from like 680 to 1020. There were a couple of gold mines in South Africa that were still mining gold at 1280. And it's true. They can continue to mine at that price because it would be a problem. But it's not a logical fallacy to say, to misstate or to state a fact. Okay, so what Trace is asking, would it be a logical fallacy that silver is available for very close to the cost of production? No. It's either a true fact that it is available at close to the cost of production, or it's a false fact, or it's a misleading fact because it's not really that way. But it is not a fallacy to state a fact. You can either state facts correctly or you can misstate facts. Would it be a logical fallacy to state that the value of gold or silver has never gone to zero? No. If gold and silver have never gone to zero, then that would be a statement of fact. However, you cannot conclude from the fact that gold and silver have never gone to zero that they would not go to zero. Because all you'd be doing is using past experience to project the future, and you can't project the future. Just like the sun comes up every day, can you predict with absolute certainty the sun will come up 10 years from now? No. Has the sun come up every day for the last 10,000 years? Yes. It's not a logical fallacy to state facts. So when you say the value of gold and silver have never gone to zero, that is not a fallacy. That can be a statement of fact. Would it be a logical fallacy to state that silver and gold have been used as money by mankind for over 50 centuries? Again, it's either a true fact or not a true fact. It's what you do with facts that creates either reasoning or fallacy. If you then say gold is money for 5,000 years, gold will always be money. That is all you need to know. Or the reason I think that gold will be money next year is because gold was money for the last 5,000 years. That isn't a logic. That is not necessarily true. The past as prologue doesn't mean that gold will be money 5,000 years from now. It can only say that it's a fact that it had been. Would it be a logical fallacy to state all currencies are reverted to their inherent value of zero over time? See, what Trace is doing, he's putting together a series of facts. But all these facts show what? In a sense, you're cherry picking them. Because what does it mean that all currencies have reverted to their inherent value of zero? There's an assertion and an assumption that therefore the current fiat currencies are going to zero, and therefore gold and silver are set to skyrocket. That's the logic. And that is a fallacy. You assert facts and you ascribe to them, therefore, from those facts, something follows. There might be a likelihood, there might be a probability, but they're not necessarily connected in a logical way where you can say, if this and this, then this is what happens. How many of those failed currencies are pegged to gold? They have maybe. That's all you need to know. I guess you really disagree with Jim Willie, De La Ville. I don't disagree with anybody. If people want to say stuff and make up stuff, I have no trouble with that. What I'm pointing out is, in most cases, they are logical fallacies. They're either misstating facts, or they're asserting facts, and the conclusions from the facts that they assert don't necessarily follow. And as long as they're stated as speculation, have at it. You got to remember, you can have a logical fallacy and still come to the right answer. So, for example, the sky is blue and the sun is out and it rained yesterday. It didn't rain yesterday because the sky is blue and the sun is out. But it did rain yesterday. So you can put together a logical fallacy and still come to the right conclusion. All right. What's next? In my opinion, gold or silver should be purchased primarily as a hedge against inflation. That's an assertion of an opinion. I would agree with that. I would think that gold is more gold than silver is in some respects, but not 100% correlated to the debasement of currency. And if inflation is there because the currency has been debased, then gold will do well. There's other types of inflation where maybe it's not necessarily currency deflate, but the point is, that's not a fallacy. That is your opinion based on facts that you know. Gold has been pegged to the SDR. Again, that's a correlation causation thing. We don't know that. Anyone buying gold or silver with the expectation of moonshot is going to be very likely to be disappointed. I see some inside jokes here from Sean Saylor. Trace Young. Lewis, you make some great points against the pumper scamming people with promises of riches. What about wealth transfer? Greatest wealth transfer. What wealth was transferred between 2010 and 2018? In 2010, April 2nd, when the supposed second leg of the silver bull run was beginning, silver was, I think, $18.20. By the end of the decade, well, right now we're at $14.44. Now, you can get these things wrong. There's nothing wrong with predicting stuff and being wrong. If I had to make, I don't make them anymore, because if you make predictions, you're going to be wrong. There's nothing wrong with making predictions. But it's the insistence that somehow you've managed to rationalize your position. And you see this. The central bank, the Fed can never raise rates. And I saw a few commentators do this. Then they raised them. Well, they didn't really raise them. Then they raised them again. Well, they only raised them twice. Then they raised it the third time. Well, but still, other people thought they'd raise them more, so I'm less wrong than they are, so I'm right. Then they kept raising them, and they finally just threw in the towel, and then they started talking about what a disaster it's going to be that the Fed has raised rates. Sean Sale. Yes, he's doing the ad hominem stuff. All is one now. Got his mug. Very well packed and excellent quality. I got to make a pitch for the mugs, because mugs won't go to zero. I'll make a bunch of logical. I'll pump mugs right now. Logical fallacies and all. Mugs are... mugs are money, period. That is all you need to know. There are things you can do with mugs that you cannot do with fiat currencies. Did you know, Sean, JP Morgan is melting down the Eagles? Yes. Database DNA. Elsie, this is great info. Knowing how to critically think is like a superpower. Sucker beware. Where did you learn all this? Well, that's a good question. I would like to say I learned it in law school, but I didn't. I've always thought this way. And these terms, it's interesting when you know something and you go back and you try to find these. That's why I can't pronounce them, because I never learned them. And it is really helpful, and it's fascinating to know, as I mentioned, that the Greeks and the Romans, they had all this stuff down. They knew rhetoric. They knew public argument. They're able to say, post hoc ergo propter hoc, after this, therefore, because of this. Ha, 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 that's a logical fallacy. Don't try that one on me again, Caesar. I'm just interested in this stuff. And I think most people are not interested in this. Most people are interested in being with the group and feeling good about being and hearing the rationalization. And I see the comments, oh, thank you very much. Now I feel better about owning 600 ounces of silver that are worth 60% less than what I paid for them. Because they've rationalized now. They've been told something. They feel like they're part of a club. They understand something that no one else does. Instead, they should understand that they lost 60%. But that's not what they want to understand. They want to feel good, and they want to rationalize. They don't want reason. They want rationalization. And that's what people do all the time. I'll give you one. If, let's say, I did well in school, I got an A on a paper. If I did poorly on a paper, teacher gave me a D. I got a D, you see. I got an A, he gave me a D. Always the case. And you try to rationalize, not reason, you rationalize why you got a D. Because the teacher gave it to you. Why'd you get an A? I earned it. All is one now. JP Morgan wants people to believe they're buying Eagles hand over fist so you can help them. I never understood that story. All right, let's see what else we got here. Good comments. Trace Young, Big Swear is no Louis Cameraceno. You know, Big Swear says a lot of good things. A lot of people they say bad stuff about him because of the the Grand Canyon thing. You know, he's researched that more than anyone else. I'm not agreeing with the Grand Canyon argument, but I haven't looked into it, so I can't trash that argument. Sean Sale, you know, Peter Schiff wished he had jumped on BTC along with 3 of Max Kaiser. He's still arguing that Bitcoin's... It doesn't matter. If you've been arguing against Bitcoin for 5 years, solely... Some people argue against Bitcoin for different reasons, for integrity reasons, whatever. But if you've just been arguing that Bitcoin has not been a valuable investment, you're wrong. It could be a stupid concept. You can argue there. You can argue there's no value to the world. It wastes electricity, whatever you want to say. But you can't argue that you would have been better off buying gold or silver. You can't. Even, oh yeah, you can say, well, everyone who put every last penny of their money in on December 15th, 2017, see? Well, most people didn't do that. Most people have had Bitcoin over a period of time, and you may dislike it, but it has outperformed gold and silver. Yeah, Dr. Benesto, that's always the case. People, you know, that's another thing about psychology, is people misremember and start to believe stuff that never happened, how they bought Bitcoin at 2 cents. And it happens when you get these closed groups where you can't refute anything. They all start to believe that they really haven't lost any money, because now they think in ounces. Well, they don't think in ounces. Anyone who tells you to think in ounces, go live in ounces. You can't. You don't. But yet, for that moment where you're listening to a video or you're whatever you're doing, you're believing that you're believing the rationalization that you haven't lost money because now you have more ounces. Also, the other one, which is classic, every time the price of your favorite asset goes down, you start rubbing your hands. This is great. I get to buy more. You know, for 28 years I've been buying more. This is the best thing that happened to me. Trace Young, are you suggesting the Warren Commission lied? Gasp. No, I wasn't suggesting anything. I hope you're getting the idea of the logical fallacy. See, a lot of people also believe, they know, the thing about the Warren Commission, the thing about 9/11, the thing about gold in Fort Knox, people have, because they can't sort out anomalies, they insist they know what happened. I don't know how many people I've spoken to. There's no gold in Fort Knox. How do you know? You don't know. Well, because they didn't do this. That's the same argument as Goldman Sachs has 250,000 gold eagles because we don't know where else they could be. How do you know there's no gold in Fort Knox? They haven't done an audit. That doesn't mean that there isn't gold there. You don't know that the Warren Commission could be 100% right. It could be wrong. It doesn't matter. But people insist that they know the answer, and they don't. Another reason about conspiracies is people don't want to believe certain monumental events could happen without being able to put all the pieces together. So therefore something you have to believe in something else. So in a sense, I've read so many books on the Kennedy assassination, and the one that makes the most sense to me, just because I read a lot, but that I would never insist on, is the mafia. But you can argue that his wife had it in for him. Why? He's running around cheating on her left and right, and she figures she would never be a suspect. That's my own theory. I never heard that one before, but I can write a book. I can find little quotes that she made, and everybody would start believing that. So when people start insisting, and again, it's this woke mentality. Oh, I know about the EMF, Exchange Stabilization Fund. EMF is a band. I know about the Exchange Stabilization Fund. I know about manipulation. I know about Fort Knox. Ha ha ha. There's no gold at Fort Knox. I have more gold than the U.S. does. This type of inside mentality is what the narrative spinners do to you. They make you think you know something that the rest of the world doesn't. And that's valuable. And if you just keep subscribing, they'll tell you more nonsense. All right, gold miners going lower than cost. You can stay home and lose money. You don't have to go to work to do that. Yeah, but the thing about gold miners is you would think, well, they would just shut down a losing proposition. They really try not to do that because it costs money to shut it down. There's environmental issues, there's employee issues, and then it costs a lot of money to start it up. So sometimes they make the determination, sometimes it's better to continue operating the mine at a loss. It's not as simple as a company, okay, so I've got my bakery, it's not making money 2 years, 3 years. It's not getting any better. I don't keep making cakes at a loss. I stop. But it's different with mining. Could I guess how gold low can go? No, I can't. I mean, I can make up a bunch of logical fallacies and explain why it's going to 10,000 and write a book about it. Or I can explain how it's going to 400 and sell a newsletter, but I don't know. Do you think the strong dollar is good for U.S. manufacturing as the rest of the world's currencies crumble? Now, this is actually a nuanced question. A strong dollar, based on what Trump is doing with these tariffs, actually could be good for U.S. manufacturing if it prevents Chinese imports from coming in. Does that make sense? Because a strong dollar would normally mean that you couldn't export your products. But if you are manufacturing to manufacture products for consumption in the United States, then a strong dollar actually helps manufacturing. Dr. Benesto, exactly. Aluminum used to be insanely expensive. Now they make pop cans out of it. I don't know what that's a response to, but that's true. In fact, someone told me, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but when Napoleon, when it was first discovered, I can't vouch for this story, but it sounds pretty cool, that when it was first discovered and Napoleon had some kind of state dinner, he had the best table, the people that were going to eat with him, they ate on the aluminum, the freshly crafted aluminum. The rest of the people used the gold goblets and so on. Dr. Modesto, instead of calling a moonshot, we should be calling it rhodium shot because of the rhodium skyrockets at $10 an ounce. It was the same with palladium. Palladium and rhodium were the big, you know, if there had been all the attention that the silver, you know, there was such a huge silver community that grew, and so many big channels that are still around today that tout silver. Imagine if they had touted palladium or rhodium. Full name. Aluminum makes up about 8% of the Earth's crust. Yes, I don't know why I think, again, don't quote me. I know that they found platinum, I think in the 17th or 18th century. They had it. That's a relatively new find, and it is pretty rare. But aluminum, I think they also found relatively recently, and it's not very rare. Diamond is just carbon. Yeah, you can make a diamond. They can now replicate with the pressure what a diamond is. For whatever reason, they can't make them clear though. Gouliam Charles, creating counterfeit money is immoral, true, false, or opinion? That's it depends. Well, it depends on how you define counterfeit. Is a government that creates money based on what they say it is counterfeit? Is a government that can say we can print as much as we want counterfeit? Well, they've already established that whatever they do is not illegal, and if counterfeit is illegal, then it's not illegal. But is it immoral to give yourself that power to create additional money? Because when you create additional money, you're creating an imbalance and you're taking money out of the hands of the people who already have it, especially the people who get the new money first. They get the benefit of the new money and everybody else gets diluted. So I would say it's a stealth, they call it stealth inflation. You can call it stealth immorality. All right. Guy is immoral, it devalues the working stiff. Yeah, probably. Sean Saylor is reading Ayn Rand and it got him interested in Aristotle. Apparently the guy who wrote up the idea for UPS as a paper in university got a C. All right. Okay, Trace Young. This is the last point we're going to take. I don't think there's very much gold in Fort Knox. Now, the reason you think that is probably because you've never heard hours and hours of YouTube videos or research on why there is gold in Fort Knox. All you've heard is a bunch of arguments why there isn't gold. And most of those arguments come from people who are pumping a gold narrative. And it goes like this. If the United States doesn't have gold and China has a lot of gold, then it's game over for the dollar. And China's going to roll its gold or some variation of this out into the stadium. And the theory behind all of that with no gold in Fort Knox is somehow that would be important. But Canada doesn't have any gold as reserves. I was told they have gold in the ground. So does the United States. The United States is, I think, the second or third largest gold reserves in the ground. Why would you want to believe that there's no gold at Fort Knox? Do you know how much 2,000 tons of gold cost? You know how much Russia's gold reserves, that massive hoard of 2,000 tons, cost? $80 billion. The United States couldn't find $80 billion and replace. I don't even know why they wouldn't have it, but why couldn't the United States buy $80 billion worth of gold? Oh, Louis, they couldn't do that because you could never buy 2,000 tons worth of gold and get away with it. Sure you can. India bought 906 tons of gold imported into India last year, and the price didn't move hardly at all. So it doesn't make sense that the United States wouldn't have gold. Why wouldn't they? Because if it was, well, let's say they didn't have it, then they would have deemed it not important to have it. But if it was important for the United States to have the gold, they could buy 2,000 tons of gold over the course of it. They could have been buying, look, they did $4 trillion in QE. And they didn't buy any gold that we know of. But they could easily buy. There's 4,000 tons of gold mined every year. The United States mines a few hundred tons a year. Why wouldn't they have gold? If it was important to have it, why wouldn't they have it? Why couldn't they acquire it? Who's stopping the United States from, if somehow they didn't have it, from buying it back? And if you believe there's all these secrets, why wouldn't they have it? It's just because you want to believe that. I believe you want to believe. I don't know you, but I'm just saying that the community around it creates this environment where it's almost like an inside joke that the U.S. doesn't have any gold, and all these other sheeple, they believe it's there. Oh, ho, ho, ho. Wait till they find out there's no gold there. They don't know either. And logically, you can make just as many arguments why the gold is there, but my best logical argument is assume there is no gold there and assume they need it. Why can't the United States, who has shown it can print print money at will, there's only supposed to be 4,100 tons of gold at Fort Knox. It's maybe 5,200. It's not even all of the gold that supposedly the U.S. Treasury has. They could easily find 4,000 tons worth of gold over the last 10 years that they've been talking about more that the U.S. doesn't have gold. So I don't believe either. I believe that the United States could have it, the United States couldn't have it, and the reason I can't insist on either is because how do I know? But that's how you should look at it. You shouldn't take a science. I just can't see the United States having gold because I heard about 20 guys on YouTube, and they're all smart guys, and they know. They don't know. All right, Sean, you're right. This is a deprogramming course. But actually, it's reprogramming. If you would... It's really what happens when you want to believe a narrative. Once you get hooked on a narrative, you lose your mind. You lose your ability to reason because you put in wishful thinking. You join a group. You're all part of it together. You're listening to some charismatic guy that you don't know, but you think he's got your best interest. He's a good guy. You send him money. He tells you what you want to hear. And that's what I think happens. And all logic goes out the window because people aren't people like to say they're logical. They like to say they're rational, but I'm not either. I mean, I do stupid stuff too. I mean, I just things based on emotion, things based on a whim. But what happens is you fall under the spell of things that aren't logical. But the worst part about it is they're using rationality, which is I would say, devil's sister to reason. And that may lead you to believe that you're not being manipulated, you're not being hooked, that you're actually being given facts and analysis when really you're being strung along, in my opinion, in some circumstance. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Don't forget to order your mugs, smaulgld.com. Mugs rule.